I never thought a single sentence could shatter 22 years of believing I was a good father-in-law, but there it was, glowing on Stella's phone screen at 3:15 on a Tuesday afternoon. Can't wait for this old man to die so I can really live. Please subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what city you're watching from. The phone had been sitting face up on my kitchen counter when the notification popped up. Stella was upstairs giving Emma a bath while I cleaned up after lunch. Michael was at work, trusting his wife and father to handle the afternoon routine we'd established since Emma started walking. I glanced at the screen out of habit, the way you might check a clock, and saw my death wish spelled out in casual Instagram cruelty. My hands started shaking before my mind fully processed what I'd read. The dish I was washing slipped from my fingers and shattered against the porcelain sink. The sound echoed through the kitchen like a gunshot, but upstairs Stella's cheerful voice continued narrating bath time to my granddaughter. I stared at those words until they blurred. Can't wait for this old man to die so I can really live. Posted 47 minutes ago. Liked by 12 people already. People who knew me, people who had sat at my dinner table, people who called me Grandpa Ross at family gatherings. The worst part wasn't the cruelty. It was the casual nature of it, like she was commenting on the weather or sharing a recipe. No anger, no heat, just matter-of-fact anticipation of my death as a gateway to her freedom. This wasn't a moment of frustration or a private complaint shared with a friend. This was a public announcement of her true feelings, posted for the world to see. I picked up the broken pieces of the dish with trembling fingers, trying to understand how I'd become such a burden to someone I'd tried so hard to help. When Stella married Michael 3 years ago, I'd welcomed her like the daughter I never had. Her own father had died when she was 12, and her mother lived across the country. I thought I was filling a void in her life, the same way she was filling one in mine. After my wife Sarah passed 2 years ago, Stella had been the one to suggest they move in with me. "You shouldn't be alone in this big house," she'd said, her hand gentle on my shoulder as I struggled through those first months of widowhood. "We're family now. Let us take care of you." I'd been so grateful for the company, for the sound of voices in rooms that had grown too quiet. I'd given them the master bedroom, insisted they take it. I'd moved into the smaller guest room, telling myself it was temporary just until they got back on their feet. That was 18 months ago. In that time, I'd watched my savings account shrink as I covered grocery bills, utility payments, car repairs, medical emergencies that always seemed to happen at the worst possible moments. Just last week, I'd written Stella a check for $800. Emergency dental work, she'd explained, her eyes filling with tears as she described the pain keeping her awake at night. I'd driven her to the appointment myself, waited in the lobby for 2 hours, then taken her home with ice cream for the swelling. She'd hugged me so tightly that day, called me the best father-in-law in the world. The memory felt poisonous now, contaminated by the knowledge of what she really thought about my continued existence. I heard water draining from the bathtub upstairs, followed by Emma's delighted giggling as Stella wrapped her in a towel. My granddaughter's happiness was real, untainted by adult deceptions. At 22 months old, Emma loved her Grandpa Ross with the pure, uncomplicated affection I'd thought I was receiving from her mother. "Ross, could you grab Emma's blue pajamas from the dryer?" Stella called down the stairs, her voice warm and considerate. The same voice that had thanked me for the dental check, that had sympathized with my grief, that had made me feel useful and needed during the loneliest period of my life. "Coming right up," I called back, my voice somehow steady despite the chaos in my chest. I walked to the laundry room on autopilot, pulling Emma's tiny pajamas from the dryer while my mind raced through every interaction I'd had with Stella over the past 3 years. How many times had she smiled at me while calculating my life expectancy? How many conversations about my health had been fishing expeditions for timeline estimates? How many expressions of concern had been performed for an audience of one? The blue pajamas were soft and warm in my hands, decorated with tiny elephants that Emma loved to point at during bedtime stories. I'd bought them for her last month, along with matching socks and a stuffed elephant she carried everywhere. Simple gestures that brought me joy, that made me feel like I was contributing something meaningful to my granddaughter's childhood. But, according to Stella's Instagram post, my contributions weren't worth the space I occupied. I was an obstacle to her real life, a roadblock between her and whatever freedom she thought my death would provide. I climbed the stairs slowly, listening to Stella's gentle murmuring as she helped Emma into a fresh diaper. The bathroom door was open. and I could see them in the mirror above the sink. Stella's face was soft with genuine affection as she tickled Emma's belly, making her laugh. The love between them was real, and it occurred to me that Emma might be the only person in this house whose feelings for me weren't complicated by financial calculations. "Here are the pajamas," I said, stepping into the doorway. Stella looked up with a smile that no longer felt warm. "You're the best, Ross. I don't know what we'd do without you." The words hit like a slap. 20 minutes ago I would have glowed at the appreciation. Now I heard the lie underneath, the performance for an audience who wasn't supposed to know the truth. She did know what she'd do without me. She'd posted about it on Instagram for 12 people to like and share. "My pleasure," I managed, handing her the pajamas while avoiding direct eye contact. Stella didn't notice my discomfort. She was too busy wrestling Emma's arms into the sleeves, narrating each step in the silly voice that always made my granddaughter giggle. "Left arm goes in the elephant tunnel, right arm follows the parade." I watched them, memorizing the scene, while my heart broke quietly in my chest. In a few minutes, Stella would take Emma downstairs for afternoon snack time. She'd probably ask me to join them, might even suggest we read a story together on the couch. She'd continue the performance of grateful daughter-in-law, while I sat there knowing exactly what she thought about my continued existence. But something else was happening alongside the heartbreak, something harder and more focused. Anger, yes, but also a kind of clarity I hadn't felt since Sarah's death. The fog of grief and loneliness that had made me grateful for any human connection was lifting, and underneath it, I found something I'd almost forgotten. I'd built a successful consulting business from nothing, raised a good son, loved a woman for 38 years until cancer took her from me. I'd survived loss and disappointment and financial setbacks that would have broken weaker men. I wasn't just some doddering old fool waiting to die. I was Ross Mitchell, 59 years old, and I'd been underestimated before. "I'll be downstairs getting snacks ready," I said, backing out of the bathroom. "So you don't have to do that," Stella called after me. "You work too hard taking care of us." The irony was breathtaking. She was worried I worked too hard while publicly celebrating the prospect of my death. The performance was so seamless, so practiced, that I wondered how long she'd been perfecting it. Had the mask ever slipped when I wasn't looking? Had Michael seen glimpses of what she really thought about his father? I walked downstairs with Emma's laughter echoing behind me, Stella's phone still glowing on the kitchen counter where she'd left it. The Instagram post was still there, the like count now up to 14. I recognized some of the names: neighbors, family friends, people who would be shocked to know they'd endorsed my death wish with a casual double tap. For the first time since reading those words, I smiled. Stella had made a mistake leaving her phone unlocked. She'd made an even bigger mistake assuming I was too old and naive to understand social media. But her biggest mistake was underestimating what a man with nothing left to lose might do when he discovered the truth. I had loved Stella like a daughter, supported her like family, trusted her with my heart and my home. Now I knew exactly what that love and trust were worth to her. The knowledge hurt, but it also freed me from any obligation to continue pretending. Stella wanted to wait for this old man to die so she could really live. What she was about to discover was that this old man was far from dead, and her real life was about to become much more complicated than she'd posted about on Instagram. The next morning, I woke up with the kind of clarity that only comes after a sleepless night of planning. Stella's Instagram post had stripped away every illusion I'd been carrying about our relationship, but it had also given me something I hadn't realized I was missing: purpose. I made coffee in the quiet kitchen at 5:30, watching the sun rise through windows I'd paid to have replaced last spring, when Stella mentioned they were drafty. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd been making improvements to a house for someone who was publicly counting down the days until my death freed her from my presence. By 6:15, I was sitting at my computer in the den, surrounded by 2 years' worth of financial records that told a story I'd been too grief-stricken and lonely to see clearly. Bank statements, credit card bills, receipts, cancelled checks. The pattern was right there in black and white, a systematic drainage of my resources, disguised as family emergencies and shared expenses. $800 for dental work last week, $1,200 for car repairs the month before, $600 for a medical emergency that required immediate payment, $1,500 to help them catch up on credit card debt that was affecting their credit score. The amounts weren't huge individually, but they added up to nearly $18,000 over the past year alone. I opened a new spreadsheet and started documenting everything. Date, amount, stated reason, actual verification when I could find it. The dental work was real. I'd driven her to the appointment myself, but the car repair receipt I found in Michael's jacket pocket showed they'd only paid $400, not the $1,200 Stella had requested. The medical emergency turned out to be a dermatology consultation for cosmetic Botox injections. The credit card debt they'd asked me to help with had been paid off 3 months before they approached me for assistance. My phone buzzed with a text from Stella. "Good morning, making pancakes for Emma's breakfast. Want me to make extra for you?" I stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "That sounds wonderful, thank you." The performance had to continue. If Stella suspected I knew about her true feelings, she'd become defensive, maybe even leave before I could fully understand the scope of what I was dealing with. I needed time to investigate, to build a complete picture of how deep this deception went. I heard footsteps upstairs as the household began stirring, Michael's shower running, Emma's babbling from her crib, Stella's voice singing softly as she changed our granddaughter's diaper. The sounds of a normal family morning, except now I knew that at least one person in this house was performing a role instead of living honestly. By 7:30, I was sitting at the breakfast table with Emma on my lap, feeding her small pieces of pancake, while Stella bustled around the kitchen with practiced domestic efficiency. She wore a soft pink robe that I'd bought her for Christmas, her hair pulled back in a messy bun that made her look younger than her 22 years. "You're so good with her," Stella said, watching me wipe syrup from Emma's fingers. "She adores her Grandpa Ross." The words should have warmed my heart. Instead, they felt like calculated manipulation, designed to reinforce my emotional investment in my role as the generous patriarch. Emma did adore me, and that love was genuine, but Stella's observation wasn't about my granddaughter's feelings. It was about reminding me of my place in the family hierarchy, keeping me invested in maintaining the financial support system I'd built around them. "She's easy to love," I said, bouncing Emma gently on my knee. "Aren't you, sweetheart?" Emma giggled and reached for my coffee cup, which I moved just out of her grasp. The simple interaction felt pure and uncomplicated, a sharp contrast to every adult relationship in this house. My granddaughter loved me without conditions or calculations. She didn't know about bank accounts or inheritance plans or Instagram posts celebrating anticipated deaths. Michael appeared in the doorway, already dressed for work, but moving with the unhurried pace of someone who didn't have to be in the office until 9. At 25, he looked remarkably like I had at his age, though he carried himself with less confidence than I remembered having. Marriage to Stella seemed to have made him more cautious, more deferential to her opinions and decisions. "Morning, Dad," he said, kissing the top of Emma's head before moving to the coffee pot. "Stella, these pancakes smell amazing." "Your father's been helping me feed Emma," Stella said, her voice warm with apparent appreciation. "I swear, I don't know how single parents manage mornings without grandparents to help." The comment was perfectly innocent on the surface, but I caught the underlying message. I was useful for childcare, for financial support, for making their lives easier. The subtext was clear. They needed me, which made my continued existence valuable, despite what Stella had posted on Instagram. "Dad's always been good with kids," Michael said, settling at the table with his coffee. "Remember how he used to make those elaborate Saturday morning breakfasts when I was little?" I did remember. After Sarah died, those breakfast memories had become precious to me, proof that I'd been a good father during the years when it mattered most. Now I wondered if Michael was sharing that memory genuinely, or if Stella had coached him to reinforce my emotional attachment to my paternal role. "I should probably head out soon," Michael said, checking his phone. "Traffic's going to be brutal if I wait much longer." "Drive carefully," Stella said, the same thing she said every morning. "Text me when you get to the office." They kissed goodbye with the easy affection of a couple who'd settled into comfortable routines. I watched them, trying to detect any signs of strain or deception in their interaction. Michael seemed genuinely fond of his wife, unaware of her true feelings about his father. Either he was a better actor than I'd given him credit for, or he was as deceived as I'd been. After Michael left, Stella and I fell into our usual morning routine. She cleaned the kitchen while I entertained Emma in the living room, playing with blocks and reading picture books until it was time for her morning nap. The domestic rhythm felt familiar and comfortable, which made the underlying deception even more disturbing. "Ross," Stella said as I carried Emma upstairs for her nap, "I wanted to ask you something when you have a minute." My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice casual. Of course, let me get Emma settled and I'll be right down. I took my time with Emma's nap routine, singing the same lullaby Sarah used to sing to Michael, adjusting the blackout curtains to create the perfect sleeping environment. Emma's eyes grew heavy as I rocked her, her small hand gripping my finger with the trusting strength of a child who felt completely safe. Whatever happened between Stella and me, I had to protect this relationship. Emma was innocent of her mother's deceptions. When I came back downstairs, Stella was sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of fresh coffee and an envelope in front of her. Her expression was serious, but not worried, the look of someone about to discuss important family business. "What's on your mind?" I asked, settling into the chair across from her. "Well," she began, sliding the envelope toward me. "Michael and I have been talking about our financial situation, and we realized we need to be more organized about our expenses. We thought it might be helpful to set up a more formal arrangement for household costs." I opened the envelope and found a handwritten budget breakdown that was impressively detailed. Mortgage payments they weren't making since the house was paid off. Utility costs they weren't responsible for since I paid those bills directly. Grocery expenses that seemed inflated based on what I'd observed. Insurance premiums for policies I carried. Maintenance costs for upkeep I performed myself. "This is very thorough," I said, studying the numbers that bore no relationship to our actual financial arrangement. "We don't want to take advantage of your generosity," Stella continued, her voice earnest with practiced sincerity. "We know how much you do for us, and we want to make sure we're contributing our fair share." The numbers on the paper suggested they should be paying me nearly $3,000 per month for their share of household expenses. It was a brilliant manipulation, designed to make me feel guilty about accepting money from a young couple struggling to establish themselves, while simultaneously making me feel appreciated for my previous generosity. "I appreciate you thinking about this," I said carefully, "but we're family. I don't want you and Michael feeling like tenants in your own home." "But that's just it," Stella said, leaning forward with apparent enthusiasm. "This isn't our home, it's yours. And we want to respect that by contributing properly. We've been talking about it for months and we finally decided to put together a real proposal." The performance was flawless. Stella managed to sound grateful, responsible, and slightly embarrassed about their previous dependence on my support. She was acknowledging my ownership of the house while simultaneously establishing their right to remain in it. Most importantly, she was positioning herself as the responsible adult who wanted to do the right thing. "Let me think about this," I said, folding the paper and putting it back in the envelope. "It's a big change from how we've been handling things." "Of course," Stella said, sitting back with a satisfied smile. "Take all the time you need. We just wanted you to know we've been thinking about it." As she cleared the coffee cups, I realized I'd just witnessed a masterclass in financial manipulation. The budget proposal wasn't about contributing to household expenses. It was about establishing a formal rental arrangement that would give them legal tenant rights in my house. Once we had a written agreement with regular payments, evicting them would become a complex legal process instead of a simple family conversation. Stella had just played her next move in a game I was only beginning to understand, but she'd made one crucial miscalculation. She thought she was playing against a grief-stricken old man who was grateful for any family connection. What she didn't know was that I'd already seen her Instagram post, and now I was playing an entirely different game with completely different rules. The old Ross Mitchell might have signed that agreement out of gratitude and family loyalty. But the new Ross Mitchell, the one who knew exactly what Stella thought about his continued existence, was going to teach her that underestimating your opponent is the fastest way to lose everything you think you've already won. The security system installation took 3 hours on Thursday morning, while Stella was at her book club and Michael was at work. I told the technician I was concerned about package theft, which wasn't entirely a lie. I was concerned about theft, just not the kind that happened on doorsteps. "You'll have audio and video coverage of all main areas," the technician explained as he showed me how to access the feeds on my phone. "Kitchen, living room, front and back entrances. The cameras are virtually invisible, and the audio quality is excellent. You'll be able to monitor everything remotely." I nodded along, learning the system with the focus of a man whose life depended on understanding every detail. Because in a way it did. Stella's Instagram post had shown me that my continued existence was an inconvenience to her, but I needed to understand the full scope of her deception before I could respond appropriately. The first recording came that afternoon. I was in my bedroom when Stella's phone rang, and through the app on my phone I watched her answer in the kitchen, where she thought she had complete privacy. "Hey girl," she said, her voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before. Harder, more calculating. "No, he's upstairs. The old man can barely climb stairs without getting winded, so I've got a few minutes." I sat on my bed, earbuds in, listening to my daughter-in-law discuss my physical limitations with casual cruelty. The conversation continued for 12 minutes, and every word felt like a small knife wound. "The house is probably worth 400,000, maybe more," Stella was saying, "and that's just the real estate. You should see the stuff he has stored in the basement, classic tools, some antique furniture, boxes of collectibles from his dead wife. The man's basically sitting on a gold mine and doesn't even know it." My throat tightened at the casual reference to Sarah as his dead wife. Sarah, who had welcomed Stella into our family, who had insisted we give them the master bedroom, who had spent her final months worrying about how I'd manage alone after she was gone. "The best part is he thinks we're broke," Stella continued, and I could hear her moving around the kitchen, probably pacing the way she did when she got excited. "Michael doesn't know I've been putting money away. I've got almost 15,000 saved up from all the emergencies the old man has been paying for. By the time he kicks the bucket, I'll have enough for a down payment on our own place." $15,000. Money I'd given her in good faith, believing I was helping my family through difficult times. Money she'd been systematically stealing while performing gratitude and financial hardship. "Trust me, it won't be much longer," Stella said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "He had that scare with his blood pressure last month, and he's been moving slower lately. Plus, men his age who lose their wives usually don't last more than a few years. It's like they give up or something." The conversation ended with Stella promising to call back later with more details about her inheritance timeline. I sat in my bedroom, staring at my phone screen, trying to process what I'd just heard. Stella wasn't just waiting for me to die. She was actively planning for it, calculating timelines and asset values like a vulture circling wounded prey. But she'd made several critical errors in her calculations. First, my blood pressure scare had been minor, easily managed with medication and diet changes. Second, I wasn't some broken widower waiting to die. I was 59 years old, in decent health despite recent grief, and apparently more resilient than she'd estimated. Most importantly, I now knew exactly what game she was playing. The second recording came 2 days later, this time a video call with someone I didn't recognize. Stella propped her phone against the coffee maker, giving me a perfect view of her facial expressions as she talked. "The old fool gave me $800 last week for dental work," she was saying, applying lipstick in the camera reflection. "I actually did get my teeth cleaned, but that only cost $120. The rest went straight into my savings account." She laughed, a sound I'd previously found charming but now recognized as coldly calculating. "Michael has no idea. He thinks his father is just being generous because he's lonely. Which he is, but that's not my problem. I didn't sign up to be nursemaid to some depressed old man when I married into this family." The person on the other end of the call must have asked about Michael, because Stella's expression shifted slightly. "Michael's sweet, but he's weak like his father. No ambition, no drive. He'd work that dead-end job forever if I let him. But once we inherit this place, I can push him to do something better with his life. Maybe start a business or something. Men need women to motivate them, you know?" I found myself wondering if Michael had any idea how his wife really felt about him. From what I could observe, he seemed genuinely fond of Stella, unaware that she viewed him as another project to be managed and improved, rather than a partner to be loved. "The father-in-law situation is temporary," Stella continued, checking her appearance in the phone camera. "I can fake being the grateful daughter-in-law for however long it takes. The payoff will be worth it." Over the following week, I collected 6 more recordings. Stella discussing my health issues with someone she called her financial advisor, who turned out to be researching life insurance policies. Stella complaining to her mother about having to pretend to care about the old man's stories, when all she wanted was to get on with real life. Stella coaching Michael on how to ask me for money for a vacation they were planning, complete with suggested talking points about how stressed they'd been and how much they deserved a break. The vacation conversation happened 3 days later, exactly as Stella had scripted it. Michael approached me after dinner with carefully rehearsed concern about Stella's stress levels and their need for quality time together. I listened to him repeat, almost word for word, the talking points his wife had given him, and I felt something break inside my chest. My son wasn't part of Stella's deception. He was another victim of it, manipulated into performing scripts written by a woman who viewed our entire family as a resource to be exploited. Michael genuinely believed his wife was struggling with depression and stress. He had no idea she was systematically stealing from his father while publicly celebrating the prospect of my death. "A vacation sounds like exactly what you two need," I told him, writing a check for the $2,500 they'd requested. "You work hard, and Stella does so much around here. You both deserve some time to relax." Michael's relief was genuine as he hugged me goodnight. "Thanks, Dad. This really means a lot to us." What he didn't know was that I'd already contacted my bank to ensure the check would bounce. Not immediately, but after they'd made their vacation reservations and gotten excited about their windfall. The timing would be perfect for the conversation I was planning to have with both of them. The final piece of evidence came from Stella's Instagram account, which I'd learned to monitor using a fake profile I'd created. The vacation photos appeared in real time. Expensive restaurants, luxury hotel rooms, spa treatments, shopping excursions that cost more than most people's monthly salaries, all funded by money she'd obtained through fictional emergencies and emotional manipulation. But the caption on the final photo stopped my heart completely. "Living my best life with my amazing husband. Can't wait to start the next chapter of our lives together. Some changes are coming sooner than expected." The photo showed Stella and Michael toasting with champagne glasses, both of them grinning at the camera. But it was the location tag that made my blood run cold. Charleston Estate Planning Services. They weren't just on vacation. Stella had convinced Michael to accompany her to a meeting with an estate planning attorney. She was already positioning herself for my death, probably researching probate processes and inheritance laws. The changes coming sooner than expected weren't about career moves or family planning. They were about accelerating whatever timeline she'd established for my demise. I sat in my quiet house, surrounded by evidence of systematic deception and emotional manipulation, and felt something I hadn't experienced since my business days: the cold, focused anger of a man who'd been underestimated by someone who was about to pay a very expensive price for their miscalculation. Stella thought she was playing chess against a lonely old man who was grateful for any human connection. What she didn't realize was that she'd just declared war against someone who'd built a successful business by recognizing patterns, anticipating problems, and developing comprehensive solutions to complex challenges. The vacation would end in 3 days. When they returned, Stella would discover that her inheritance timeline had just been accelerated in ways she never could have anticipated. But instead of inheriting a fortune, she was about to learn what it felt like to lose everything she thought she'd already won. I opened my laptop and began composing a very detailed email to my attorney. It was time to remind Stella that this old man wasn't dead yet, and he still had a few moves left to play in this game she'd started. They returned from Charleston on a Sunday evening, both of them glowing with vacation relaxation and whatever legal consultations Stella had arranged. I watched from my bedroom window as Michael unloaded their luggage, moving with the easy confidence of a man whose wife had just secured their financial future. He had no idea that his father had spent the weekend preparing a very different kind of future for both of them. "Ross," Stella called from the front door, her voice bright with performed enthusiasm. "We're back, and we brought you something special." I made my way downstairs, noting how Stella's smile seemed especially radiant. She was practically vibrating with excitement, probably anticipating whatever inheritance timeline she'd discussed with the Charleston estate planning attorney. The shopping bag she thrust toward me contained a bottle of expensive bourbon and a package of cigars I'd never expressed interest in smoking. "You shouldn't have spent your money on me," I said, accepting the gifts with appropriate gratitude. "It wasn't expensive," Stella lied smoothly. "Besides, you've been so generous letting us take this trip. The least we could do was bring back something nice for you." Michael appeared with their suitcases, looking tired but happy. "Dad, you should have seen this place we stayed at. Right on the water with this incredible restaurant downstairs. Stella found it online, got us some kind of deal. The deal had probably involved using my money to pay for luxury accommodations while researching how to inherit my assets more efficiently. But I smiled and nodded, playing the role of the generous father who was pleased to see his family enjoying themselves. "I'm glad you both had a good time," I said. "You work hard and deserve nice things." Over dinner, they regaled me with carefully edited stories about their vacation. The beach, the restaurants, the shopping, the historic tours. What they didn't mention was the meeting with the estate planning attorney, though Stella kept glancing at Michael with a barely contained excitement that suggested significant developments. We were talking on the drive home, Stella said as I served dessert, about how grateful we are for everything you do for us. This house, your support, the way you help with Emma, we don't take any of it for granted. The performance was flawless, but I'd learned to recognize the calculation behind her expressions of gratitude. Every word was designed to reinforce my emotional investment in their presence while positioning herself as the appreciative recipient of my generosity. Family takes care of family, I replied, the same thing I'd been saying for 3 years. That's what Sarah would have wanted. At the mention of my wife's name, Stella's expression shifted to practiced sympathy. She'd be so proud of the man you've become since her passing, the way you've opened your heart and home to us, the grandfather you've been to Emma. She's watching over all of us, I'm sure of it. The words should have comforted me. Instead, they felt like a violation of Sarah's memory, spoken by a woman who privately referred to my dead wife as a source of potential inheritance assets. I excused myself shortly after dinner, claiming fatigue, and retreated to my bedroom to review the final preparations for what was about to unfold. Monday morning began with typical domestic routine. Michael left for work at 7:30, Stella busied herself with Emma's breakfast, and I pretended to read the newspaper while monitoring the security feed on my phone. At 9:15, exactly as I'd anticipated, Stella made a phone call. "It went perfectly," she said, settling into the kitchen chair with her coffee. The attorney explained everything about probate timelines and asset distribution. If something happens to the old man, we're looking at inheriting everything within 6 to 8 months. I adjusted my earbuds, making sure I captured every word of what would be the final conversation Stella had in my house. "Michael doesn't know about the life insurance policies yet," she continued. "I figured I'd wait until we actually need to file claims. No point in getting his hopes up if the old man takes longer to die than we're planning." Life insurance policies. My stomach clenched as I realized Stella had been researching my financial situation more thoroughly than I'd imagined. What other documents had she accessed? What other information had she gathered during my vulnerable moments of grief and loneliness? "The best part is he has no idea we're prepared," Stella was saying. "He still thinks we're the struggling young couple who need his help. When the time comes, we'll be ready to move fast on everything." The conversation continued for 8 more minutes, covering details about asset liquidation, property sales, and timeline optimization that made my skin crawl. Stella had turned my death into a business plan, complete with projected revenues and efficiency strategies. At 10:30, my attorney arrived as scheduled. David Chen had been handling my legal affairs for 15 years, and his expression was grimly serious as I led him into my study and closed the door. "I've reviewed everything you sent me," he said, settling into the chair across from my desk. "The recordings, the financial documentation, the evidence of systematic deception. Ross, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain you want to proceed with this approach?" I looked through the study window at the garden Sarah had planted, now maintained by my own hands in her memory. "David, my daughter-in-law posted on social media that she can't wait for me to die. She's been stealing my money while performing gratitude. She's coaching my son to manipulate me for vacation funds. She's researching my life insurance policies and consulting estate planning attorneys about accelerating inheritance timelines." David nodded slowly. "The evidence is comprehensive and damning, but the consequences for her will be severe." "The consequences for me have already been severe," I replied. "I've been emotionally manipulated, financially exploited, and publicly humiliated by someone I trusted like a daughter. If she wants to plan for my death, I'm going to give her the opportunity to see how well those plans work out." At 11:45, the doorbell rang. Stella answered it, and I heard her surprised voice greeting someone she clearly hadn't expected to see. "Mrs. Mitchell?" The voice belonged to Detective Sarah Ramirez, whom David had contacted after reviewing my evidence. "I'm Detective Ramirez with the Fraud Investigation Unit. We'd like to speak with you about some financial irregularities that have been reported." I emerged from the study as Stella was leading the detective into the living room, her face pale, but still attempting to maintain composure. Michael must have gotten David's call because he arrived 20 minutes later, rushing through the front door with panic written across his features. "Dad, what's going on?" he asked, looking between me, the detective, and his wife, who was now sitting on the couch with tears streaming down her face. "Michael," I said, my voice steady despite the storm in my chest, "we need to have a family conversation about some things I've discovered." Detective Ramirez had spread the printed evidence across my coffee table, bank statements showing systematic withdrawals, recordings, transcripts, documenting fraudulent emergency claims, screenshots of Instagram posts celebrating my anticipated death, and documentation from the Charleston attorney meeting that revealed the scope of Stella's inheritance planning. "I don't understand," Michael said, staring at the evidence with growing horror. "Stella, what is this? What Instagram post?" Stella's composure finally cracked completely. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this," she sobbed. "I was just frustrated, and I posted something stupid. I didn't mean it." "Which part didn't you mean?" I asked quietly. "The part about wanting me to die, or the part about stealing my money to finance your real life?" The silence that followed was deafening. Michael looked like a man watching his world collapse in real time, which was exactly what was happening. The detective continued documenting everything with professional detachment, but I could see the disgust in her expression as she reviewed the evidence of systematic elder abuse. "The $15,000 in your private savings account," Detective Ramirez said to Stella, consulting her notes. "Can you explain how you accumulated that money while claiming financial hardship to Mr. Mitchell?" Stella's tears increased, but her explanation was a masterpiece of self-justification mixed with attempted manipulation. She'd been planning a surprise for Michael. She'd been trying to save money for Emma's future. She'd been scared about their financial security and wanted to build a safety net. Every reason except the truth that she'd been systematically stealing from a grieving widower while publicly celebrating his anticipated death. "What about the estate planning consultation in Charleston?" the detective continued. "What was the purpose of that meeting?" Michael's head snapped toward his wife with an expression I'd never seen before. "What estate planning consultation?" The truth emerged in fragments over the next hour. Stella's research into my assets, her timeline calculations for my death, her coached conversations designed to extract maximum financial support, her complete disregard for my emotional well-being while performing the role of grateful daughter-in-law. With each revelation, Michael seemed to shrink further into himself. This wasn't just about money or manipulation. This was about the systematic destruction of every relationship that had mattered to him, orchestrated by the woman he'd married and trusted with his heart. "I want her out of my house," I said finally, when the detective had finished her preliminary investigation. "Today. Now." "Dad," Michael started, but I held up my hand. "This isn't about you, son. You're welcome here as long as you want to stay, but she has 1 hour to pack whatever belongs to her and leave. After that, she'll be trespassing." Stella looked up from her tears with something approaching her old calculating expression. "You can't just throw me out. I have rights. We have a rental agreement." I smiled for the first time since this confrontation began. "Actually, we don't. You proposed a rental agreement last week, but I never signed it. This is my house, and you're here at my discretion. That discretion has just been permanently revoked." The reality of her situation finally penetrated Stella's panic. She was about to lose everything: the house, the financial support, the inheritance timeline, and most importantly, the family she'd been systematically exploiting while planning for my death. But as I watched her gather her things under Detective Ramirez's supervision, I realized that what I felt wasn't satisfaction or revenge. It was something much simpler and more profound: the restoration of my own self-respect, and the knowledge that I'd finally stopped enabling someone who viewed my existence as an obstacle to her happiness. Stella had wanted to know what would happen when this old man died. Now she was about to discover what happened when he decided to start living again. The silence in my house after Stella left was different from the loneliness I'd felt after Sarah's death. This was the silence of truth, heavy but clean, like the air after a thunderstorm has cleared away the humidity and tension. Michael sat at the kitchen table, staring at the spot where Detective Ramirez had spread out the evidence of his wife's systematic deception, looking like a man trying to reassemble a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "I should have seen it," he said for the 4th time in the past hour. "There were signs, weren't there? Things I should have noticed." I poured fresh coffee into our cups, buying time to choose my words carefully. My son was devastated, and while I felt vindicated by the exposure of Stella's true nature, I took no pleasure in watching Michael's world collapse. "She was very good at what she did," I said finally. "Professional manipulators know how to make their victims feel responsible for not seeing through the deception." Michael looked up at me with eyes that reminded me painfully of his mother. "But you figured it out. How long have you known?" I told him about the Instagram post, about the security cameras, about the recorded conversations that had revealed the scope of Stella's planning. With each detail, Michael's expression grew more pained, not just from betrayal, but from the realization of how blind he'd been to his wife's true character. "The vacation money," he said suddenly. "She coached me on exactly what to say to you. I thought she was helping me ask for something we needed, but she was teaching me how to manipulate my own father." The hurt in his voice was raw and immediate. Michael had always been an honest person, sometimes to a fault. The idea that he'd been turned into an unwitting accomplice in his wife's schemes was devastating to his sense of himself as a good man. "You didn't know," I said. "That's not the same as being complicit." But Michael shook his head. "I should have questioned why she always knew exactly how much money to ask for, or why she had so many opinions about your health and your habits. I should have wondered why she was always so interested in your financial situation." The truth was that Michael should have noticed those things, but pointing that out wouldn't help him heal from this betrayal. Instead, I focused on something more important. What matters now is what you decide to do going forward. Michael was quiet for a long time, processing everything that had happened. Emma woke up from her afternoon nap around 3 o'clock, and the sound of her cheerful babbling from the baby monitor reminded us both that there were innocent victims in this situation who needed protection and stability. "I can't go back to her," Michael said, as I started toward the stairs to get Emma. "Not after knowing what she really thinks about you, about us. But Dad, I don't know how to be a single father. I don't know how to explain this to Emma when she's older." I paused at the bottom of the stairs. "You don't have to figure everything out today, and you don't have to do it alone." By evening, we'd established a new temporary routine. Michael called his supervisor to request family leave, explaining that he was dealing with a personal crisis that required his immediate attention. I helped him move Emma's crib into his old bedroom, transforming it into a proper nursery space. We ordered takeout for dinner and ate while Emma played with blocks on the living room floor, creating an odd sense of normalcy despite the upheaval. The doorbell rang at 7:30, and through the security camera, I saw Stella standing on my front porch with 2 large suitcases and an expression that had hardened from tearful desperation into cold determination. She was no longer the broken woman who'd been escorted out by Detective Ramirez. This was someone who'd had 6 hours to regroup and develop a new strategy. "I'm not answering that," Michael said, looking at the camera feed on my phone. "You don't have to," I replied, "but I think I should." I opened the door but didn't invite her inside. Stella looked past me toward the living room, where she could see Michael sitting with Emma, and her expression shifted to something I'd never seen before: genuine fury. "You destroyed my marriage," she said without preamble. "You manipulated my husband against me using lies and recordings you made illegally." The accusation was breathtaking in its reversal of reality. "Stella, I recorded conversations that took place in my own home. Nothing illegal about that. And I didn't manipulate anyone. I simply showed Michael evidence of what you've been doing. What I've been doing is trying to build a life with your son while dealing with a bitter old man who couldn't stand seeing us happy," she shot back. "Everything I said, everything I did, was because you made our lives impossible." I could see Michael through the open doorway, watching this exchange with an expression that mixed disbelief with growing anger. Emma was in his lap, oblivious to the adult drama unfolding around her. "The Instagram post," I said quietly, "explained to me how wishing for my death was about building a life with Michael." For the first time, Stella's composure flickered. That was a private expression of frustration. "Everyone says things they don't mean when they're stressed." "To 12 people who liked it," I replied. "That's not private frustration. That's public celebration of my anticipated death." Stella's mask slipped completely then, revealing something cold and calculating that I'd only glimpsed in the recorded conversations. "You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I was tired of pretending to care about your boring stories and your constant neediness. Yes, I was tired of having to perform gratitude for every little thing you did while you guilt-tripped us into staying here. And yes, I thought our lives would be better when you weren't around to complicate everything. The honesty was almost refreshing after months of manipulation and performance. Thank you, I said. That's the first genuine thing you've said to me in 3 years. But none of that makes me the monster you're painting me as, Stella continued. I never hurt you. I never stole from you. I took money you offered freely and I used it to build security for your son and granddaughter. The rewriting of history was remarkable to witness. In Stella's version, the systematic deception became financial planning, the emotional manipulation became stress management, and the inheritance research became responsible preparation for the future. The $15,000 in your savings account, I said. Money I gave you for emergencies that didn't exist. How is that not theft? That's money I saved from household allowances you gave us, she replied without missing a beat. Money I was putting away for Emma's future and for emergencies you couldn't anticipate. Michael appeared behind me in the doorway, Emma still in his arms. Stella, stop, just stop lying. I heard the recordings, I saw the evidence. You were planning our inheritance like Dad was already dead. Stella's expression shifted when she saw her husband, becoming softer and more vulnerable. Michael, baby, you have to understand. I was scared. Scared about our future. Scared about what would happen to us if something happened to your father. I was trying to protect our family by stealing from my father while publicly wishing for his death. Michael's voice was steady but cold. By coaching me to manipulate him for vacation money. By researching his life insurance policies. I never researched any life insurance policies, Stella said quickly. I pulled out my phone and played the recording where she discussed the policies with her friend. Stella's face went pale as her own voice filled the evening air, casually discussing my death as a timeline to be optimized rather than a loss to be mourned. I want a divorce, Michael said when the recording ended. I want you out of our lives completely. Stella stared at him for a long moment, and I could see her calculating whether there was any path back to the manipulation and control she'd lost. When she realized there wasn't, something shifted in her expression. Fine, she said, her voice turning hard again, but don't think this is over. I have rights as Emma's mother, and I won't let you and your bitter father poison my daughter against me. Emma will always be welcome to have a relationship with you, Michael replied, but it won't be in this house and it won't involve any financial support from my father. Stella picked up her suitcases and walked toward the car she'd somehow acquired in the 6 hours since leaving. At the bottom of the porch steps, she turned back with one final attempt at manipulation. You'll regret this, Michael. Both of you. When you're struggling to raise Emma alone, when you realize how much I contributed to this family, you'll understand what you threw away. I already understand, Michael said quietly. I threw away 3 years of my life living with someone who saw my father's death as a business opportunity and my love as a tool for financial manipulation. We watched her drive away, and I realized that the woman I'd tried to love like a daughter had never existed. The real Stella was the one who'd just threatened my son and granddaughter before disappearing into the night, leaving behind only the evidence of systematic deception and the painful lessons we'd learned about trust and family. But as I stood on my porch with Michael and Emma, I also realized something else. I felt lighter than I had in 3 years. The performance was over. The truth was exposed. And for the first time since Sarah's death, I was surrounded only by people who genuinely loved me. The silence that followed Stella's departure wasn't empty. It was full of possibility, of honest relationships, and of the chance to rebuild our family on a foundation of truth instead of manipulation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight, we were finally free. 6 months later, I woke up in my bedroom to the sound of Emma's laughter echoing through the house and Michael singing off-key in the kitchen. The morning sunlight streamed through windows that Sarah had chosen 15 years ago, and for the first time since her death, the house felt like a home instead of a museum of memories I was afraid to disturb. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. Those first weeks after Stella's departure had been difficult for all of us, especially Michael, who struggled with guilt, betrayal, and the practical challenges of single parenthood. But gradually, we'd found our rhythm as a family of 3 generations, each of us contributing what we could to create something new and honest. I padded downstairs in my robe to find Michael flipping pancakes while Emma sat in her high chair, chattering in the complicated language of 28-month-olds. The scene was domestic and peaceful, a sharp contrast to the performed family breakfasts I'd endured with Stella. "Morning, Dad," Michael said, sliding a plate of pancakes toward me. "Emma's been asking for Grandpa for the past 10 minutes. "Grandpa," Emma announced, reaching her syrup-sticky hands toward me. "Pancakes?" I settled into the chair beside her, feeling the simple contentment that came from being genuinely wanted instead of financially useful. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you help Daddy make breakfast?" Emma nodded seriously, pointing to the step stool beside the counter where she'd apparently supervised the cooking process. At almost 2.5, she was developing a personality that reminded me of Sarah, curious, determined, and completely honest about her feelings. "Any word from the attorney about the final paperwork?" I asked Michael as we ate. "The divorce should be finalized next week," he replied. Stella didn't contest anything once she realized she wasn't getting any financial settlement. Apparently her new boyfriend has money, so she moved on pretty quickly. We'd learned through mutual friends that Stella had landed on her feet with remarkable speed, attaching herself to a recently divorced businessman who appreciated her attention and didn't know about her history of financial manipulation. I felt sorry for him, but not enough to interfere. Stella's future victims would have to learn their own lessons about trust and verification. "What about the custody arrangement?" I asked. Michael's expression grew more serious. "She gets Emma every other weekend and 1 evening per week. But Dad, she hasn't used her visitation time in 3 weeks. Last time she picked Emma up, she brought her back 2 hours early because Emma was being difficult." I watched my granddaughter work methodically through her pancakes, completely absorbed in the important business of breakfast. Emma wasn't difficult. She was a normal toddler who needed consistency, patience, and genuine attention. Stella had never developed the capacity for any of those things. "Emma doesn't seem bothered by it," I observed. "That's what worries me," Michael admitted. "She's stopped asking about Mommy. It's like she's already adjusted to Stella not being reliable." Children, I'd learned, were remarkably adaptable when it came to protecting themselves from disappointment. Emma was developing the emotional resilience that came from having consistent caregivers who prioritized her needs over their own convenience. After breakfast, I helped Michael get Emma ready for daycare while he prepared for work. The routine was smooth now, developed over months of trial and error. We'd learned to divide responsibilities based on our strengths. Michael handled the technical aspects of parenting, while I provided emotional support and practical backup. "I should be home by 6, Michael said, kissing Emma goodbye. "Mrs. Rodriguez said she might stop by this afternoon to drop off those tamales she promised you." Mrs. Rodriguez was our neighbor, a widow in her 70s who'd become an unofficial grandmother figure for Emma and a close friend for me. She'd been horrified when she learned about Stella's deception, but not entirely surprised. "That girl always seemed too sweet," she told me. "Real kindness doesn't work so hard to be noticed." After Michael left, I settled into my morning routine with the satisfaction of a man whose time was his own again. The financial stress that had characterized the past 3 years was gone, replaced by a budget that made sense and savings that were actually growing instead of being systematically drained. I'd started volunteering at the community center 3 mornings a week, helping seniors with tax preparation and basic financial planning. The work gave me purpose while allowing me to use skills I'd developed during my business years. More importantly, it helped me spot the warning signs of elder financial abuse that I'd missed in my own situation. "Mr. Mitchell," one of my regular clients had said just last week, "you saved me $1,500 by catching that fake charity scam. How did you know it wasn't legitimate?" The answer was experience. I'd learned to recognize manipulation tactics, emotional pressure techniques, and the subtle signs that someone was more interested in my assets than my well-being. The education had been expensive, but it was paying dividends in my ability to help others avoid similar mistakes. My phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Forgot Emma's stuffed elephant. She's asking for it. Could you drop it off at daycare?" I smiled, remembering the times Stella had made similar requests, but with an undertone of resentment, as if my willingness to help was something she deserved rather than appreciated. Michael's requests came with genuine gratitude and the understanding that my help was voluntary, not obligatory. The drive to Emma's daycare took me through the neighborhood where I'd lived for 20 years, past houses that held memories of block parties and holiday gatherings from before Sarah's illness changed everything. People waved from their yards, friends who'd supported me through my wife's death, and had been quietly relieved when Stella finally left. "We never trusted that girl," my neighbor Tom had admitted after Stella's departure. "But you seemed happy, so we didn't want to interfere. Should have said something sooner." The truth was that I hadn't been happy during those 3 years. I'd been grateful for company and afraid of being alone, which wasn't the same thing. Real happiness, I'd discovered, required authentic relationships built on mutual respect, rather than transactional exchanges disguised as family affection. At the daycare, Emma ran to me with the pure joy of a child whose love was uncomplicated by adult agendas. "Grandpa, you brought Ellie?" Ellie was the stuffed elephant, worn soft from constant companionship and crucial for afternoon nap time. I hugged Emma and watched her settle contentedly with her elephant, surrounded by other children who accepted her exactly as she was. "She's such a happy little girl," her teacher commented. "You and your son are doing a wonderful job with her." The compliment warmed me more than any praise I'd received during my business career. Emma's happiness was genuine, built on a foundation of consistent love and reliable caregivers. We were giving her what every child deserved, adults who put her needs first and showed up when they promised to be there. That evening, after Michael returned from work and we'd finished dinner, the three of us settled in the living room for our nightly routine. Emma played with her blocks, while Michael and I discussed plans for the weekend. The conversation was easy and honest, free from the undercurrents of manipulation that had characterized family discussions when Stella lived with us. "Dad," Michael said, as Emma began showing signs of bedtime tiredness, "I want you to know how grateful I am for everything you've done these past months. Not just the financial support, but the way you've helped me figure out how to be a good single father." I looked at my son, who'd grown stronger and more confident since freeing himself from a marriage built on deception. "Michael, you've always been a good father. You just needed the space to do it without someone undermining your instincts." As I helped put Emma to bed reading her favorite story about a little bunny who found her way home, I reflected on how much our lives had changed since that terrible day when I discovered Stella's Instagram post. The pain of that betrayal had been intense, but it had also been clarifying. Stella had taught me valuable lessons about the difference between gratitude and manipulation, between family loyalty and financial exploitation, between genuine love and performed affection. The education had been expensive and emotionally devastating, but it had also freed me to build authentic relationships based on mutual respect rather than transactional exchanges. Standing in my granddaughter's doorway, watching her sleep peacefully in a house where she was genuinely loved and valued, I realized that Stella had been wrong about everything. My death wouldn't have given her the freedom to really live. It would have destroyed the family that Michael and Emma deserved, replacing it with hollow relationships based on inheritance calculations rather than love. Instead, exposing the truth had given all of us the freedom to really live. Michael was becoming the man and father he was meant to be. Emma was growing up surrounded by honest love, and I was rediscovering the satisfaction that came from relationships built on truth rather than convenience. The house was quiet now, filled with the peaceful silence of people who had nothing to hide from each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but they would be honest challenges faced by people who genuinely cared about each other's well-being. I'd survived the systematic emotional and financial abuse disguised as family love. More than survived. I'd reclaimed my dignity, protected my son and granddaughter, and learned to value myself enough to demand authentic relationships. Stella had wanted to wait for this old man to die so she could really live. Instead, she'd taught him how to start living again, surrounded by people who loved him for who he was rather than what he could provide. For the first time in 3 years, that was enough.